That's right. Former research fellow, International Security Program, 95 to 97. And he's also a former research fellow. Right now he's a professor at the Department of Political Science and Geography, University of Texas at San Antonio, and the author of several really, really good books on China. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That and the nonsense going on with Iran in the Middle East. We're going to get his take on that too. And let's get right to him. Dr. Thayer, great to have you with us, sir.
John, great to be with you this morning.
Let's talk about the president's initiative here with China. He slapped another $300 billion of their goods with 25% tariffs. He did that he said he was going to do it, and he did it. And, of course, the Chinese, shocked by the whole thing because they were negotiating what the president thought was good faith. And President Xi was going to Mar-a-Lago, and they were having a Coke, and his good friend. And the Chinese do, Dr. Thayer, what they've been doing for 50 years. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they stall. And then all the negotiations that the president thought he had, they reneged on all of them, thinking that this president, like every other president they've dealt with, would simply cave to their pressure, and they'd want to make a deal so they could run to the Washington Post or the New York Times or whatever. And just Trump didn't play it that way. And so now what do? The Chinese?
Well, right. They're in a fix. The steps that you mentioned, and remember also on Wednesday, he basically banned the Chinese supply products from U.S. Essentially from U.S. government or from industries that are going to be working with the U.S. government, and that's part of his ABC plan. Anybody but China, right, for the supply chain. You don't want these Chinese corporations essentially providing backdoors and other technological means to gather intelligence with respect to our military or to steal intellectual property from our companies. So that was a big step on Wednesday, and we're already seeing Huawei, the big Chinese IT firm that makes a lot of cell phones, is recognizing that, well, now, as a result of Trump's executive order on Wednesday, they're going to have a real trouble making their cell phones now because Google has acted, essentially restricting Huawei's access to Android and other technological elements that are going to be going on that would be produced in the phone. So the Chinese are beginning to recognize they've made a huge mistake, and they're going to start paying for it. And that's a very important development. And they are recognizing that Trump is not like his predecessors, that Trump is recognizing that this is a trade war, it's a national security issue, and it's really the first step of an intensifying conflict with China.
When you say the first step, Dr. Thayer, of an intensifying conflict, if you study China like you have or like Steve Bannon has, they really are a number one enemy. They have a 2025 plan. They have a 2050 plan. The 2050 plan includes basically that they have world military and economic dominance. And so they've been all over the globe trying to get their claws in various things. So when you say that the Chinese-U.S. relationships are going to further fray, what's the end game here for the Chinese? Just wait Trump out?
Well, certainly they want to do that. They're hoping that Trump will be defeated in 2020, and they'll have a new president, perhaps a Joe Biden, who will be more amenable to their interests. And in their mind, they want to go back to the future, right? They want to go back to what happened and the way trade deals were negotiated before 2016. And that, I think, they're sorely mistaken. I think that Trump is going to get reelected, of course, in 2020. But even if that were not the case, it's going to be very hard for any American president to go back to the way it was before, simply because of what Trump did for us. And he recognized that China has been taking advantage of us in trade, as well as advancing, obviously, in military measures and their desire to confront the United States. As you said, they have their 2025 plan. They have their plan that by 100 years after the Chinese Revolution of 1949. By about 2050, they're going to be the dominant state in the world. So China's bad behavior and its increasingly aggressive behavior is going to compel American presidents to respond. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to be like it was in the past.
Mm-hmm. Back to the future. I like that. We're with Dr. Bradley Thayer. He is professor, Department of Political Science and Geography, University of Texas at San Antonio, and he is also the author of several must-read books on China. And one of the first people that really started to understand the threat that China has economically and otherwise. Dr. Thayer, let's get to Joe Biden. And let's get to Joe Biden's dealings with the Chinese, especially, sir, as those relate to his son, Hunter Biden, who got a $1.5 billion Chinese communist infusion into his investment firm, although he knew nothing about investment banking. It was not even his background. He didn't work that long on Wall Street. He got $1.5 billion. Went to China with his father when he was vice president. A lot of people raising their eyebrows on this and saying, maybe is Joe Biden compromised? Maybe he strong-armed the Chinese into doing this for his son in order for them to make money. Any truth at all to any of this?
Well, I think that for Biden, this is a very significant problem, and it's going to be hard for him to get out of it. But it's just the way the Chinese do business, John, which is the way that they approach politicians around the world, Australia, Britain, in Europe, and in the United States. Remember the Clinton scandals of the mid-1990s, the Johnny Chung and the coffees, that essentially the Chinese were trying to get influence with the Clinton administration along similar lines, using a similar tactic. So it's very important for Western politicians, Joe Biden, everyone else, Sherry Blair, the wife of Tony Blair in the UK, for example, former prime minister in Britain. The Chinese are going to approach relatives. They're going to approach candidates directly and offer them sweetheart deals. And a lot of politicians around the world have enriched themselves in that way. But it's time to recognize that's got to end. You can't do that anymore, given the totality and the force of the Chinese threat. You have to recognize that that's going to be really the opponent is coming to try to offer this sweet business deal. So it's going to be a major embarrassment for Biden as this develops, as well as for any of the other presidential candidates in 2020 or in years in the future who've had these type of sweetheart deals with Chinese corporations. And there are a lot of them around the world. So it's very dangerous. And as Mitt Romney said about Biden's comments, if you remember from 2 weeks ago, where Biden was trying to downplay the China threat, saying, come on, man, they're not real threats for us. Right? Romney said that's not going to age well, right? Well, Biden and Romney, to some extent, are recognizing we're in a new age. This is a new period in international politics. This is the period defined by Sino-American confrontation. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be very unlike the past. It's a little bit like American politicians who would have been said favorable things about the Soviet Union, right, in 1945 or 1946
right.
or 1947. It didn't age well.
Right,
when that conflict intensified. So this is going to be an embarrassment for Biden. And his remarks thus far on China are going to come back to haunt him in a general campaign.
Well, and he's got a lot of them. I mean, we're just focusing on the ones he said 2 weeks ago. You start going back to the archives, there's a lot of things he said that are going to be brought up. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, Trucking the Truth Across America. I am with Dr. Bradley Thayer, and he is a professor of political science at University of Texas, San Antonio. He's also co-author of one of the best books on China written. It's called How China Sees the World, Han Centrism and the Balance of Power in International Politics. And you can buy that book at your favorite bookstore or at Amazon, How China Sees the World. Dr. Thayer, I'm going to go to a quick word from our sponsor. Stay with us. When I get back, I'm going to talk about the Iranian situation. I want you to weigh in on that. And is the UAE and KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, pushing the U.S. towards a war with Iran where we become UAE's proxy. Is that possible? Dr. Thayer on that when I get back. Keep it right here. John Fredericks Radio Network. Great to have you back with Dr. Bradley Thayer. Dr. Thayer is co-author of the book, How China Sees the World, and he's a college professor right now at University of Texas, San Antonio. He's got a long list of titles, but we can eat up our whole show with that. Very noted academician and author around the world. Dr. Thayer, so we have this situation now in Iran where the rhetoric is raising to levels that I'm not comfortable with. As you know, the president campaigning against not getting involved in regime change or these Middle Eastern wars, but you've got both KSA, the Saudi Arabia, and you've got UAE pushing the U.S. towards war, saying that the Straits of Hormuz is threatened. Their vessels might be under attack. We're moving assets into the area. Iran's responding by moving around missiles, which cause us to move more assets. And you know how these things escalate. Meantime, let me just ask you this. There's two conferences going on in the Gulf on this that KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, has put together. They've not invited Qatar to either of the summits in the Gulf, which is like one of the key Gulf nations. I mean, it's inconceivable to me. How do you really trust the Saudis and Mohammed bin Salman in handling any of this? How do you do that?
Well, it's obviously very difficult, and it's tricky. The Saudis have their own interests, and the United States has its own interests, and they overlap to a large degree with respect to stability in the Gulf and the stability of all the Gulf sheikdoms in that area. But they don't overlap entirely. So tension between Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia has been a significant problem now for a few years, and they've worked hard, that is Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other states have worked hard to isolate Qatar as a result of some of its policies. But the big issue here is Iran and Iran's efforts to interfere in Saudi Arabia with the sabotage of the tankers that we've seen in recent days in the oil pipeline last week. And that's a real danger. We don't want anything to interfere with oil production and export from Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf sheikdoms. And Iran, of course, is the sworn enemy of Saudi Arabia. So the Trump administration, to its great credit, is trying to send a very strong military signal to Iran to, hey, the events can get out of hand, and you don't want to face the United States. I think that message has been sent, and I think this crisis is going to de-escalate. I think we're going to see both sides kind of back away in this area in the days and the weeks to come, because it's in nobody's interest, really, for this. Not in the U.S. interest, the Gulf Sheikhdom, Saudi Arabia, or the Iranian interest to fight over this. But it's kind of a fundamental problem that we have in our relationship in the Middle East, which is Iran is picking fights with key allies of the United States, allies who are important because we need essentially their energy. We and our allies need their energy, and we need to have relative stability and low prices in energy markets. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia have been have worked hard really to ensure those interests of the United States.
Is there any chance you think that this attack might have been staged by the United Arab Emirates? I mean, it just seems to me, I can't figure out. I've asked several scholars this. Why would the Iranians, knowing that the last thing they want is conflict with us right now, because they're gaining ground just by doing what they're doing in Yemen and Syria, whatever. Like, why would they risk conflict by doing something that blatant? And what would even the objective be? So they blow a hole in some UAE tanker. So, like, what would the objective of that be? That's what I can't figure. That's what I can't get my arms around.
The objectives are for Iran to send a signal to these states that when they transgress Iranian interests, there's going to be some payback. There's going to be a cost to be paid for doing that, even if they're backed by the United States. So it's a little bit of, if you will, a kind of a tit-for-tat strategy where, one side is going to act in Yemen and there's going to be a response in the Gulf, or the reverse. But Iran wants to convey to the Gulf Sheikhdom and Saudi Arabia that Iran is the regional dominant power. That's its historical role in history under the Persians or under our great ally in the Cold War, the Shah of Iran. So the Iranians still have that legacy, versus the Gulf Sheikdoms and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who don't want to live under essentially a neighborhood that's ruled by Iran.
Right.
So they call in Uncle Sam to help them out. And, of course, Iran does not want to confront the U.S.
I wouldn't think they would. Of course, they did get the $2.1 billion from us in cash, so maybe they're looking for another cash payment. There's just so many things that go on there that defy all logic. That payment on the pallets that we brought in, I never really got where President Obama thought he was going to get out of that. And, of course, they've used that money to create mischief and havoc all over the Middle East, all over the Gulf. That's what they've essentially taken that money for. They didn't build roads with it. But tell you what, Dr. Thayer, we're out of time for this segment. I really want to thank you for being with us today. Always enjoy your unique and depth of perspective, sir. Thank you.
John, my pleasure.